If you've ever felt like it takes you forever to finish a sewing project, you're not alone. In this video, I've identified 5 common reasons why people are slow at sewing, and I'll give you some tips on how to fix them. You can skip to the one that's most relevant to you. I've linked the timeline in the description box. Number 1, you can't control your machine's speed, so you have to stop a lot and that's slowing you down, or you have to keep your machine at the slowest speed if you have adjustable speeds. This may sound counterintuitive, but if this is your issue, I want you to practice sewing really slowly. If your machine has adjustable speeds, don't leave it on the slowest speed for this exercise. Move it up to about the middle speed. So what I want you to do is practice sewing on scrap fabric with your heel on the floor, not on the pedal, not in the air, on the floor, and practice lowering the ball of your foot very gently onto the pedal. Practice sewing as slowly as possible, applying just the right amount of pressure so that the machine doesn't jump forward. Do this a few times a week on scrap fabric so that you get the hang of going really slowly. This is so important. If you're not able to control the machine speed, you're never going to be able to sew quickly because the machine is going to jump forward and go all over the place, and you'll have to stop and restart constantly. Last thing I'll say about this is that some machine pedals are really crappy and don't allow you to control your speed well. This can especially be the case if you got a machine recently and it's a budget model. If that's the case, go to a sewing machine store and see if you can buy a new pedal that's more responsive. Reason number 2 why you might be slow: you can't sew straight. The way that most experienced people sew straight is by lining up visually the edge of their fabric with some kind of reference point on their machine. A lot of machines have these lines on the plate to the right of the foot that are varying distances away from the needle, and those distances are typically common seam allowances. So on a North American machine, you might have 1/4 of an inch, 3/8, 1/2 an inch, 5/8, etc. If the distance isn't written on, you can always use a tape measure and measure out from the needle. A lot of the time I sew with 1/2 an inch of seam allowance, so I line up the edge of my fabric with the 1/2 inch line, and then I watch as I'm sewing to make sure that the edge stays more or less at that line the entire time. If you find it difficult to keep your fabric lined up with these small lines, you can get magnets at a lot of sewing stores that you put on the machine's metal plate at the desired distance, or you could also put a piece of colored tape at the desired distance so that it's easier to see. I'd recommend practicing this on scrap fabric. Just make sure that you've cut a straight line along the grain line. Probably, I don't know, a few times a week, maybe 5 or 10 minutes each time until you get the hang of it. Once you've got that down, try it with different shapes. Try it with the circle, try it with something that's slightly curved, etc. Once you've mastered this and the machine control thing that I mentioned earlier, you're going to be able to go really fast. Number 3, you have a lack of garment construction knowledge and it's slowing you down because you're sitting there going, wait, how do I put this thing together? There is no real quick fix for this, unfortunately. Garment construction knowledge is just something you have to learn by making different garments. One thing I can recommend though is using patterns where the company offers additional resources beyond just the pattern itself. Closet Core Patterns is a great example of this. In addition to the thorough instructions in their patterns, they also have a blog where they explain a lot of the concepts for making their patterns in more depth. Another idea is to take online sewing courses that teach you garment construction techniques in bite-sized pieces at your own pace. A great example of this is Sew It Academy, which is really affordable. I've linked Closet Core Patterns and Sew It Academy in the description. Number 4, a lot of beginners have issues with fabric, including not being able to hold it in position properly, having it stretch or slip as they're sewing, having it fall on the floor, etc. If you're just starting out, don't make things difficult for yourself. Start with easy fabrics. Quilting cotton is a great fabric for beginners, so is muslin. Most woven, non-stretchy, non-slippery cotton fabrics are a safe bet. Linen is too. And definitely use pins. It's a good idea to pin crosswise like this. If you've grown beyond easy cotton and linen fabrics and are working with something a bit more slippery or stretchy, something I like to do is slide some tissue paper between the 2 layers of fabric. I have also tried this with regular printer paper, but tissue paper is nicer because it's easier to rip out after you're done sewing and it's easier to pin. So just pin the tissue paper in between the 2 layers, doesn't have to be as wide as the entire piece you're sewing, and go to town. If fabric issues are slowing you down, this will most likely help you get a lot faster. One last thing I will say, don't let the fabric fall off the table as you're sewing. Easier said than done, I know. If you're sewing something really long, put another table or a chair or a stool next to the table that you're working at and let the fabric just sit there. And finally, you're slow at sewing because your machine is having problems and it's slowing you down. I can't diagnose what's wrong with your machine, but I can give you some tips. The first is to make sure that you've filled and inserted your bobbin correctly and that you've threaded your machine correctly. If you didn't push your bobbin all the way into the bobbin case, or you didn't thread through one of the loops that the thread should be going through, you're most likely going to have a lot of problems sewing, and it's amazing how often one of these things is the cause of the problem. So pull out your manual, you can find one online if you've lost the physical one, and make sure that you've filled the bobbin, inserted the bobbin, and threaded the machine correctly. Beyond that, if you haven't had your machine serviced in, say, 2 years, and suddenly a new problem has cropped up, you should probably take it to the sewing machine repair shop to get serviced. If you use your machine really regularly, you should probably get it serviced even more than that. If it's been serviced recently, and you've checked and the bobbin is filled and inserted, and the machine threaded correctly, then it might be time to get help from someone more experienced. If you're taking a sewing class, ask your teacher or ask a friend. You can also join a Facebook group. Those Darn So-and-Sos was one that I was part of for a long time, and they have a lot of experienced people in that group, and there are many other groups as well. Post photos of the issue you're having and describe it, and the people in those groups will be happy to try and help troubleshoot. That is all for today. Please like this video if it was helpful to you. I would love it if you subscribed, and I will see you in the next video.